had to do with old cars when you rebuilt them back in the day. You run them at low RPM, so you got about 300 miles on it, and then you gradually open up a little bit more and more. For 102-year-old car, it's pretty good. Welcome to the episode of Jay Leno's Garage, the car featuring today 1920-21 ReVere, powered by a Rochester Duesenberg engine. These are extremely rare and really fast. You know, it's interesting. The Duesenberg brothers, before they built the famous Model J, the car that made them famous, the Duesenberg, in the teens, they were race car engine builders. They loved to go racing, and they built an engine called the walking beam engine. It was 4 cylinders, it was about 5.5 liter. It was called the walking beam because, well, it was a cheap alternative to dual overhead cams. What you had was, well, I'll show you when I open the hood, but the valves are overhead valves, but to come up from the side, you had almost a piece like a piece of flat steel like this. The valve would be here, the cam is way down here in the block, and it would work this way. And they were fairly easy to build, extremely reliable. In fact, in the first 100 races the Duesenberg brothers competed in, only twice did they place lower than 4th place. But they sold just engines, not complete cars at that time. But you didn't make a lot of money racing. And so what they did was they would sell this engine to anybody that wanted to buy it. ReVere bought it, Biddle, Richelieu, all kinds of people bought these motors and put them in what they call assembled cars, put together cars. Much like today, you'd get Brembo brakes, and you'd get a Tremec transmission, and a Chevy engine, and you build a car. And this is what you'd call an assembled car. Actually, it was a scam that turned out to make a pretty good car. There were all sorts of charlatans around back in the day. And a guy named Van Zandt, who was president of ReVere, decided to build a car using the Duesenberg engine. And it was one of those things where you sell more stock than you should, and you take a lot of money, and then you declare bankruptcy and you abscond. In fact, Van Zandt was found dead in his hotel room with a bunch of money in a suitcase, so you can figure out what happened there. While building a car just to sell to the public, he built a pretty good car. It had Duesenberg Rochester engine. It had the Brown and Lippy 4-speed transmission, a lot of aluminum, aluminum doors, aluminum radiator shell. We had to recast that and make it. This was a very fast car back in the day, about 340 cubic inches, just a torque monster. Of course, it doesn't seem fast by today's standards, but if you were to drive a Model T and then didn't get in this, it would be like going from, oh, I don't know, maybe a Ford Falcon to a Tesla Plaid, because this was over 100 horsepower and the Model T was 22. So there you go right there. Not a bad looking car either. In fact, Van Zandt, it's too bad he was a crook, because he could have been a pretty successful businessman. He got the famous Cannonball Baker to do a 17,000-mile capital run, visiting all the capitals in the United States in one of these in some record time. You know, that's what they did back in the day. You did stuff that got you in the newspaper to help sell cars. I don't think there's more than 4 or 5 of these left. And this engine is extremely rare. Let me show you what we mean by the walking beam. I'm going to open this up here. Okay, see, here's your spark plugs here, and here are your valves. Notice there's no head. This is all one casting. The advantages to that was you couldn't blow a head gasket because there was no head gasket. You had to come up from the bottom to get anything done. Notice the unusual placement of the exhaust manifold. It comes off the top. We can see that better from the other side. The only thing that is not stock on this car is I put a modern McLaren clutch in it, a hydraulic clutch, just to make it easier to shift. But other than that, it's exactly as it would have been when it left the factory. We did make pistons and rods, but we kept the original compression ratio. It's like 5.2, something like that. Put nice polished Carrillo rods in it. I just wanted to make this a bulletproof engine and I could run all day long, because there aren't any. When this block cracks or goes, that's it. You're not going to find another one. Although I did find another one that's next door. But other than that, there aren't anymore, put it that way. Pretty straightforward. Generator, starter right here, magneto ignition. That's your horn right there. Original fan, original radiator. Let me show you what this car looked like. I found this car up in Oregon back in 2005. And here's what it looked like. Actually, it didn't look bad, but it had been sitting for probably 50 years when I got it. And it was just pretty far gone. Everything was worn out. Everything was just broken or rusty with a lot of parts missing, and that's what we had to do. That's an example of what the walking beam looks like there. You'll see the way it would push the valves from the side. Okay. Let's go around the other side. Oh, and check out these bullet headlights, which I think are really kind of cool. Those are original too. You know, although it didn't look that bad in the pictures, every surface was dented or chipped or rusted. Let me show you underneath this hood here. Here we go. Now, your walking beams are under there. Okay, your cam is way down here in the block, and in here is where you'll see, here's a picture of them laid out. And you'll see how they work the valves. Here's that overhead exhaust, which is kind of cool. I'd never seen that in a car before. This is really a racing engine. Stromberg carburetor here. You know, this starter motor, I've never found another one. You know, it didn't work when I got it, so we can find one. What we never did. Apparently it's unique to this vehicle. We finally got it. We found a guy who could fix this for us, and we got that running, so that turned out okay. But this thing fought us every step of the way. It just sat for a long, long time. Everything was rusted. There were no parts for it. You kind of had to guess what went where. But it's actually turned out to be pretty good. And it's got a nice rumble to it, too, which is kind of neat. As I said, that's the original radiator. We remade this shell. We cast this in aluminum. And I thought we did a pretty good job. It turned out okay. All right, let's put this down. A lot of what were high-performance options, the buffalo wire wheels, which were kind of a racy accessory back in the day. The side mirrors, the twin spares. As you can see, it is a convertible, although I've kept the top up. I just don't want to get it all wrinkled and folded. So the windshield opens. This opens as well, allow fresh air in. This was, I guess, a luxury car, but a fast car. You know, most cars were 3 speeds. This was a 4-speed, fourth being like an overdrive. You only had brakes on the rear wheels, which made it a little dicey. But don't forget, this is the early 20s. I mean, most roads are still dirt roads, so people probably traveled at 45 miles an hour at best. But it's just a lot of fun to drive. You get an idea what performance was like back in the day. I mean, Cannonball Baker, I think he set a couple of records going, you know, New York to San Francisco and vice versa, you know, going through dirt roads and rocky mountains, and there was no paved roads. It was pretty amazing. And when he set his 17,000-mile capital-to-capital run there, it was pretty amazing feat. It was in all the papers. And it sold a bunch of these cars. But you know, back in the early 20s, there were literally hundreds and hundreds of car manufacturers in the United States. It was kind of like the computer industry here. You use stuff from Dell and Microsoft, and you put a bunch of things together and you make your own automobile. And that's what this was. This had the Duesenberg Rochester engine. It had the Brown and Lippy transmission. Yeah, just all kinds of things like that. So I think they only built about 252 cars. I only know of one other one. I think Wayne Carini had one for a while, but they're pretty rare. They're pretty rare. And the thing that caused them to be saved, as opposed to saving Fords and Chevys in the period, was that Rochester Duesenberg engine. The name Duesenberg was magic even back in the teens before the Model J, because they won Indy, they won all the dirt races and, you know, Altoona and all those kind of things, all the fairgrounds, because the walking beam engine was the precursor to the twin cam. When the twin cam came out, that was a bit more sophisticated. But this is an engine that was pretty bulletproof, had great reputation for reliability, and was pretty fast. So I think we're about ready to start this thing up. Here's your gauges. This is your choke. This is your oil pressure. This is your clock. These are pretty elaborate. You know, the way you wind these, you push it forward, and then you turn the and that winds the clock, and then to adjust the time, you pull it out. Speedometer, odometer, tripometer, starter button, cowl vent. This is your ammeter. These are your 2 lights for nighttime driving. I have an electric fuel pump. I didn't go with a mechanical pump. And this is your ignition switch here. Here's your magneto. This is advance and retard. That's retard. That's advance right there. And this one here is your, for your gas, increase your idle, or even use it as a cruise control if you want. And of course the horn. Handbrake here, and of course your 4-speed transmission. Let's see how she starts. Okay, pretty throaty. It's a big motor, 5.5 liter, but 4 cylinders, so your pistons are like that. Come on, let's take it for a ride. This car is 102 years old. That's pretty good. And I would put this up against any of the European cars of the same period, you know, the Sunbeams and even some of the first 3-liter Bentleys. Kind of cool. You can tell people you had the engine that won in Indianapolis. I'm surprised it starts as good as it does, considering it's just a straight magneto. But you know, I got a good magneto guy, this guy Bob Smith, and he does just beautiful work. So I got that magneto back. You just turn the shaft a little bit and man, a spark jumps like you snapped your fingers, like, man, just like that. So it always fires up right away. That's why back in the day, magnetos were superior to battery and coil if they were, you know, if they were built properly. And you get a good magneto, and it's great because your whole electrical system can be out, but you don't need a battery, you don't need anything. Just pulls. Even when the car's 102 years old, kids ask you, hey, you the original owner? Yeah. You know, today's a hot day. It must be in the 90s, close to 100. Yeah, she's running nice and cool. We just got this thing together. I don't have too many miles on it, so I'm just keeping the revs down until I get at least 500 miles. But it just slumps along. It's fun to drive. Imagine Cannonball Baker driving this thing to every state capital. I don't know how long it took him. Must have been a month or so. Maybe longer. 17,000 miles. Boy, it's taken me close to 20 years to get this thing together. I bought it in apparently 2004 or 5. Engine needed everything. As I mentioned before, Carrillo rods, new pistons. Really didn't know much about it. There wasn't a lot written on these motors. If there was, it's all been pretty much lost to history at this point. But that's the great thing about mechanical stuff. It's fairly easy to figure out. It really is one of the winningest engines in American history. You know, this thing actually runs pretty good. 100-degree day. It's not the best day to be driving a 102-year-old car, but it seems okay. Engine temperature is normal. It's not hot. Nothing seems to be leaking or dripping. So as long as air is flowing through that radiator, it still stay cool. Boy, this top is like really hot. I'm actually glad I don't have it down today. It's amazing how cool these keep you actually under here compared to being on top of it. When we get this engine broken in a little bit more, we'll open it up. But right now, I'm keeping the rev down. Going about, what are we? About 45 miles an hour, 50. For a 102-year-old car, it's pretty good. So what you had to do with old cars when you rebuilt them back in the day, you run them at low RPM so you got about 300 miles on it, and then you gradually open it up a little bit more and more. I'm looking at my motometer. The motometer is that gauge on top of the radiator. That's your temperature gauge. And it's actually below normal, so it's running pretty cool. Actually, the temperature's gone down quite a bit since I've been driving in here. Well, that's a good sign, especially on a day like today. Remember, this is a non-pressurized system, so. But you know, we cleaned that block out good, we soaked it, we had it flushed out with acid and everything, got all the rust and corrosion out, all the water jacks are open, so, you know, a lot of people don't get this old stuff. I love it, I think it's just great. Because it's logical, you know. Like I always say, mechanical stuff breaks, electronic stuff degrades. And you can never tell when something electronic is broken, whereas a mechanical, you can just look at it and see. Now, see that little run at 45 miles an hour, it dropped well below cool. So this thing is, this radiator works well. This engine, the freer it gets. It's finally warming up now. And there's still a few of these cars left, not many. In fact, a lot of guys pay more money for just the engine than they do for the whole car. Anyway, thanks for coming on this little break-in ride. Probably got about 25, 30 miles on this thing. But maybe we'll do an update at another point. But as you can see, it runs pretty good. It's got plenty of torque, plenty of power. You can more than keep up with LA traffic on a Friday night when it's bumper to bumper. Yeah, not the best car. As I said before, you've only got brakes on the rear wheels, which means you've only got brakes on the rear wheels. So you kind of have to be a little careful. But that being said, still a lot of fun to drive. We'll see you guys next week.